big, powerful mix does not come from a bunch of layers stacked on top of each other. A big mix sounds big because everything is in tune and it's hitting at the same time.
Hello, Bobby Torres of Frightbox Recording here with an interview with one of my all-time favorite producers, Jordan Valeriot. Now, I'm so excited for you to hear this interview, not only because Jordan's put out countless top-notch records with bands like Neck Deep, Silverstein, and Intervals, but also because he uses the exact same tools that you and I use, a DAW and a handful of basic plugins. That's it. Now, as you know, I'm a firm believer in workflow and systems over gear, and Jordan is a prime example of that. Now, if you're looking to improve your productions in the real world, I highly recommend you listening to this entire interview. There are solid nuggets of gold here. He shares everything from how he got his start as a pro metal producer to the tools that he uses in his home studio, as well as some of his secrets behind how he puts out such killer productions on such a consistent basis. So pop some popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy this in-depth interview with Mr. Jordan Valeriot of Hardcore Music Studio. Hello, Bobby Torres of Frightbox Recording here, and I would like to welcome Mr. Jordan Valeriot to the channel.
What's going on, Bobby?
What's up, man? How are you?
Doing well. Yeah, doing well and happy to be here.
Excellent. Now, if you're not familiar with Jordan's work, he's worked with bands such as Silverstein, Forevermore, Intervals, and my personal favorite, Dead and Divine. Dude, I love that record.
Oh man, yeah, that was probably one of my favorite recording experiences. I love a lot of stuff about that record too.
Dude, it's just a certain like punch and clarity, yet warmth. That's the thing I love most about it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would say like I was really excited about that record, like production wise and song wise. The one thing I wish I could have done better was the snare. When I listen to it now, I don't like the snare sound.
Dude, that's like my favorite part.
I know, you're not the first person to say that. It's kind of funny, like I feel like at any level you get to, right? Like no matter how long you've been doing this, I think you'll always look back at your old mixes and be like, yeah, I could have done that different or better.
So dude, how did you get into production in the first place? Like, is this something you've always wanted to do, or is it you kind of fell into it?
I didn't know I wanted to do it until I think I was in high school, like grade 11 or something. And a friend of mine, like we had kind of punk and hardcore bands all kind of through high school. And someone we knew was going to college for recording arts, and for his project, he offered to record our band. So we went in there, and the first time I stepped in the studio, it was I had no concept of it before, but as soon as I walked in, I was like, this is amazing. This is what I want to do. And I also felt like from that day on, I felt like I had a bit of a knack for it, at least a sense of like how I wanted things to sound. I didn't know how to actually achieve that, and turned out to be a lot harder than I thought. But yeah, just from that first day being in a band, it just switched from like wanting to be a band dude touring and playing shows to be like, oh, I want to be that guy behind the glass. I can't explain it. It was just instantly, I just felt like that's what I wanted. Did you do the two simultaneously, like play in a band while engineering at the same time, or did you just switch right over? No, I did both for a while. So that was in high school, and then it was still like a couple years. I mean, I kind of was messing around with recording stuff at home, I guess, but there wasn't really like, you know, the interfaces and the gear and the software back then. So I couldn't really do much. I was kind of hoping to go to school for it, to start learning. But yeah, eventually I got a chance to, that same guy who recorded us, he started a studio in my hometown, and then he actually did it for a couple of years and was wanting to get out of it. So I actually took a loan, bought his gear, took over rent at the space he was renting, and that was like the same year I was supposed to go to school for audio stuff. And I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to try and do it on my own. So I just took it over. I had no idea what I was doing. And yeah, I was recording my band was the first thing I started recording, and just a bunch of other local bands as well. So you inherited all of his gear as well, just the whole package, the room, gear, whole entire studio? Yeah, it was pretty fortunate for sure. It just kind of was this perfect storm. But yeah, he had had a family friend, I guess, who has this kind of farm property, and he had this separate garage, separate from the house, that he had converted half of it into a studio. It was very small. It had like just small control room, small live room, and he was renting it out because he wasn't using it. And yeah, that's where my friend had a studio. He had all his gear, so the computer, the little Pro Tool setup. It was all like very budget. It was mostly Behringer stuff. And, just the basic Pro Tools rig. So very, very simple starting out. But yeah, I was kind of lucky to at least have a space and the gear just kind of.
That's incredible, man. So you didn't have to buy anything new, or just like little knickknacks here and there?
Yeah, I mean, over time, definitely I started buying, and eventually, like within a few years, probably nothing that was there originally remained.
Yeah.
Just as I learned more and just started getting better stuff. But yeah, I didn't really have to set up from scratch, but I also had no idea what anything was.
Yeah.
Like he literally showed me, like, okay, here's how you plug in the mic into this interface, and then here's how you get it to show up in Pro Tools and record a track. That's like literally all I knew.
So you were
like,
starting from scratch.
Absolute scratch, man. I think it was months and months before I even probably inserted a plugin. Like I didn't even know what that was.
Honestly, I found that sometimes that's the best way to learn. Just be jump right in kind of deal. So you didn't go to school for audio at all. You're completely self-taught.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow, that's incredible. So you started off recording your own projects, and then eventually, how long did it take till you like landed your first official client?
Yeah, it wasn't long, honestly, because I was playing in bands for so long before that, I just had this network. So I would just start recording demos for my own band. And I didn't have that mental block that I think a lot of people have today, where it's like, oh, I'm going to wait till my stuff is a certain level of quality before I can put stuff out. I was just like, I'm here. I want to learn. I want to record bands. I'm just going to start doing it. So, I just kind of let people know, my friends who are in bands, like, hey, I've got the studio. Do you want to do some demos? And I mean, they sounded horrible at first, like absolutely horrible.
But I know how that is. I definitely know how that is.
Like, I think I might have done a couple freebies just for fun, but almost right away I was, charging whatever, like $40 a song or something, and bands would come in on the weekend or whatever, and we'd knock out an EP or something.
What would you say? Okay, so early on when you started out and you were, working with your first clients, what was the most challenging thing that always came up time and time again that would be the most frustrating?
Yeah, in those early days, when I listen back to the work, I was actually doing this last week. I'm putting together a video of kind of like showing the progression of my work from being horrible to 10 years later. So I was listening to some stuff from way back then, and it was crazy. Like within the same year, there would be a huge range of like quality, and from like absolutely brutal to like, oh, this actually doesn't sound bad. And the difference is just that once in a while, the band who would come in, like, they would be awesome players. And so it would instantly sound twice as good as I was normally capable of. So I would say that was kind of looking back, that was probably the number one frustration that I had, is that I was just literally just like, again, I didn't know anything about EQing and compressing. Like I was just starting to learn that stuff. So it was pretty much just like put a mic up somewhere. I still didn't know what I was doing. And it was basically just up to the band, like how good can you play? That's kind of going to determine how good my recording is.
And I'm sure like many others, when you started out, you didn't know much about editing and, getting things tight or any of that, or, recording a riff in parts, probably none of that came into play. So however they were is how it ended up sounding,
Yeah, exactly, man.
What would you say is the tipping point, on this topic, where you finally felt comfortable and you felt like you could charge clients and this could be a real full-time career for you?
Yeah, so since I kind of took over that studio and started recording local bands, just super cheap on the side, whatever, just gradually learning, it was kind of, I would say maybe about 2 years of that. And I was starting to get frustrated because at first I was okay with, I knew that my stuff didn't sound great, but no one was really expecting anything great. And I wasn't either. I knew I was just learning. But after a couple of years, I was kind of like comparing my progress to other studios in the area and be like, man, my stuff is just not as good. Like, what's going on? And by that time, I'd maybe discovered like, the Gear Sluts forum, and I was reading and learning more. So all this info is like flooding in my brain, and I can't get the result I want, right? So, and I just felt like I didn't know what I didn't know. So I said to myself, like, okay, what I'm doing is not working. I'm progressing at a snail's pace here. So I got to get outside of this little bubble, this little cave of a studio by myself. I want to actually go and see how people are doing this in a pro setting. So I ended up getting an intern / kind of assistant gig at a bigger studio in Toronto, which is the closest big city here, and was there for 6 months and got to witness a couple really cool projects come by. Specifically, a producer named John Fields came in. He was tracking for a Jonas Brothers record, ended up getting mixed by Chris Lord Alge, went platinum. So was in the room for like 6 days where they were tracking like 5 or 6 songs off that record from the ground up. And it wasn't just that week, but that was one of the big turning points for me, I'd say, where I just like, my mind was just expanded so much in terms of how a pro actually works, what things should sound like in the studio. Just so much of that, what the final mix ends up sounding like after that. But yeah, that was that one experience, plus just kind of overall 6 months being around that environment. Everything just changed of how I was looking at making records. And of course, I would, whenever I had spare time from that job, I would go back to my studio and try out everything I was learning. So yeah, it was about 6 months of working there. And then I ended up quitting at the end of that year. It was the end of 2007. And I just felt like I was getting more clients lined up at my studio. And I was just like, you know what, I think I can just make a go of this. And ended up quitting that assistant gig and went full-time at my studio and never looked back. So that was 2008.
Dude, that's a year worth, well spent, I would say. So what did you take away? I know you mentioned those first 6 days, I think you said, on that Jonas Brothers record. What did you notice he was doing that you weren't doing on your own?
So just the decisiveness and the speed was crazy to me. Like he knew exactly what he wanted. Even before they arrived at the studio, again, I was assisting, so I was kind of help setting everything up. He had sent a list. He had looked at what we had at the studio. He's like, okay, can you please rent a distressor? We need this drum kit. We need you to get this snare drum. We need these 2 guitar amps. Like he knew exactly what gear he wanted to get the sound he needed. And it was like as he was miking up the drums, he knew exactly where to put everything. There wasn't second guessing. He just, with the drum kit, I think maybe after setting up the mics, he went in and listened and he maybe tweaked like one mic position. That's it. With the guitar amps, he went in and just put up a 57 and a Royer ribbon mic beside each other, which is a pretty classic combo. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, he's going to like blend these in. But then when he went to record the guitar, he was literally just like, he would pick up the guitar, just play it for a second with the part with the song. And then he would just put up the 57 fader and listen, and then put up the 121 fader and listen. And he would just go with whatever one sounded best for the part, like not blending them. Yeah, it was, and he wasn't in there with a flashlight, like, messing around. Like he just knew where to put it. Everything was very fast. And that was a big contrast to how I was working, where it was like, multiple mics on everything for backup, blending everything, just having all the options open. He just committed. That was the hugest thing. And also things sounded like a record, like right off the board. Like I was blown away. So those are kind of the big takeaways for sure.
So in other words, he made Chris Lord-Alge's life very easy when they sent him the tracks.
Yes. And that really like set in, I guess, a while after that. Like it must have been at least 6-8 months after that experience when the album came out in stores. And I remember driving to the store, buying the CD, put it in my car, and I'm thinking, okay, I got to watch some of these songs be tracked, so I know how they sound like in the studio. And in my head, I'm expecting like a completely different sound in the mix, right? Because it's Chris Lord-Alge. He's probably going to put all his own drum samples on. Everything's going to be like completely changed, right? But when I put it in, I was like, wait a second, those drums sound kind of exactly like what I heard in the tracking room. And all the tones are the same. It just sounded like maybe 20% more exciting and kind of polished. And a little extra punch and all that stuff, but the tones were not changed. Like he clearly worked with what was there and just enhanced it. And that was another thing that I was like, oh, wait a second, like this is how the pros are working. Like they're getting the sounds and tones at the source, and it's not completely changing at the mix. It's just enhancing. And again, that was opposite of what I was doing, because I was tracking drums, completely replacing everything in the mix. Tracking guitars, and then I'd end up reamping or just mangling it with EQ. Like it was always just fixing and changing everything after the band went home. Yeah. And this was the complete opposite. Dude, it's funny. I feel like that's one of the big secrets is just getting it right at the source. People think there's some magical like guitar EQ or drum EQ, when in reality, you just need to make decisions fast and just know what you want to hear. Now, obviously that comes with experience also, as you probably know. My next question, you said your studio was a smaller studio, right? By the way, was this Sundown Studios? That's Sundown Studios.
Dude,
yeah.
Wow. I remember watching on YouTube some of your recording sessions with intervals. You ever tracked intervals out of there? And then also Dead and Divine. That was a cool little space though.
Yeah, intervals, Silverstein, Dead and Divine, counterparts, yeah, it ended up being a pretty cool, cozy spot. I think bands digged it. And yeah, but pretty much all the records that I, produced and tracked were done there.
I noticed that it was, like you were saying, it's not a huge, like you didn't have a huge live room to track drums in, for example. But I noticed on your productions, the drums always sound killer. They sound huge. How did you make that small space sound so big, especially for your drum recording?
Yeah, good question. I'm glad that you think that, because that's something I definitely struggled with for a while. I think early on, again, when I was just learning, of course, I didn't know anything about room treatment either, so I didn't really have any treatment on the walls, and my drums sounded really bad. And eventually, I think it took a little bit of time to learn and understand the room. And what I found was that I wasn't going to get a big live room sound out of this space. Like, it was maybe 15 by 18-ish, just normal ceiling heights. So I gradually started adding more, treatment, wall panels, ceiling clouds eventually, and I just started deadening it more and more. And I noticed the more treatment I put up, the better my drums sounded. At least they sounded like tight, right? And it was kind of helping the bleed, and there wasn't that as much nasty kind of room tone. So that was a big thing, is I realized this is a small room. I'm not going to get a big drum room sound out of it, so let's just try to deaden it as much as possible. So that was the one thing that helped. But of course, still, that left me with really dry, kind of boring drum sounds because there's no room. So what I found out, I cannot remember how I discovered this, but I take the same approach even in any other studio I go to, big or small, but especially the small places, is how the studio was set up. If you can picture it, it's like that main tracking room, and the entrance was basically right beside the tracking room, but there was a really tiny like mudroom. So you'd come in the door, there'd be like maybe a 4-foot by 3-foot little almost closet space where you could come in and take your coat off and your shoes and stuff. And then there was another door leading into the tracking room. So this space was only like maybe 5 feet from where I set up the drum kit to record, but there was a door in between. So I found that if I put a stereo pair of mics in there and closed the door, it sounded huge. It sounded like the mics were like 20 feet away, and it just had this really cool vibe to it. So I started, using that more and more, and blending that in with kind of the tight kit sound that I had in the room. And man, there's some records where I use tons of that in the mix. And now even if I go to another small space to track, I'm always looking for those kind of cool, weird spaces to put a mic to just try to get something that has some unique vibe.
And the cool thing is you probably don't get a lot of cymbals in your room in that particular mic, right? It's mainly just the bombastic sound of the shells. Dude, it's funny. I have a cheapo IKEA shelf because my studio is nothing fancy at all. And it's a similar thing. You stick the mic behind the IKEA shelf and it almost acts like a natural low pass filter. And it just makes the room sound so much bigger than it actually is. So
yeah,
now I
love that, man.
You used a stereo pair in the section, in a separate room.
Yeah, I did. It's kind of weird. Like for a while, I just put one mic. There's some mono mic there. Yeah. And I was like, man, I'm just going to put stereo pair, just kind of XY on top of each other. And for some reason, it sounded a little better. I don't know. It just sounded bigger. Yeah.
I'm going to have to try that next time. It's cool.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so on the topic of tracking, what was your approach to guitar? Were you one of those guys that I know you said you you learned from the producer to keep it simple. Were you sticking, 2 mics on a cab, trying out a bunch of different cabs, recording a DI, reamping, or did you keep it straightforward?
Yeah, so it definitely went from what you're talking about, trying tons of mics. The first guy I ever recorded with, he put like 4 mics on the guitar cab, like one on every speaker.
Oh God.
And so of course I knew nothing. So when I took over, I was like, that's what I should do.
Yeah.
And, but anyways, yeah, I learned to keep it simple. And today, 99% of the time, it's just an SM57 on the right spot in the cab, and, not blending multiple cabs or multiple amps or anything like that. Just finding the tone that we want with one mic, and going for it. Occasionally, if it's maybe something that's a little more, not so much metal or as technical, and it's more of like a rock kind of sound, occasionally I do like a ribbon mic blended with the 57, just a little bit. But I mean, I'd be just as happy to just roll the 57, honestly.
Dude, it's funny. I think it was Andy Sneap would say, he's in interviews I've read him say that you could track an entire record with 57s if you really needed to,
Yeah.
So,
totally.
And I do not disagree. So now, did you track, even though you're not a reamping guy, do you track DIs with your guitars?
Yeah, I do. It's mostly for the visual,
Yeah.
for editing.
God, yeah, because the transients are more obvious. It's not a blob on your screen. So I always tell people that a lot of people that some of my students, they're not interested in reamping. I tell them still track DIs. One, you have that safety net if you maybe want to change something, because guitar tone can be tricky. And also it's just so much easier to edit, like you were saying. So it's pretty much, you would say it's standard these days, track DIs for guitars?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
I think I started doing that. Yeah, again, probably 2008 or so. And I'll always take it for the exact same reasons as you.
Yeah.
I'd say I kind of, maybe out of like the last 10 years of tracking DIs with guitars, I've maybe reamped like 3 times.
Get it right at the source.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like to work fast, and that's a huge hassle to me. Like if I'm reamping guitars on an album, there's some mixers and engineers who I respect who do that. Like they'll literally track a DI, and then when it's time to mix, they'll reamp all the guitars. And I'm just like, man, how can you do that? Like it takes so long.
Yeah. But, so what do you do when you get a mix that you're not like, let's say you're mixing a project for a band and you're not too crazy about the tone that they've captured what's your go-to approach for that?
Yeah. So I have remixed, or reamped in those scenarios for sure. Yeah. I will always try to work with what's there first. Yeah. And again, 90% of the time I'll make that work. I'll find something good about it that I can pull out. But if it's totally unusable, then I'll reamp. And back in those days of the studio, that would mean with my 5150 or my JCM 800. Nice. But these days, honestly, I would just throw up one of the amps and plugins that I really dig, the Neural P Nolly plugin. Man, it sounds like as good as my real amps that I capture. So I would just probably roll with that.
I 100% agree, man. I know there's all this debate on the internet about amp sims but who is real? Even maybe they feel a little different while you're playing through them. Maybe, but the actual listener, even musicians can never tell the difference, in my opinion. And I'm sure you feel the same way.
I do now. Yeah. I was definitely one of those guys, like, because when I was really a lot busier tracking records and stuff, the really good amp sims didn't exist. Yeah. And so I would say, like, for a long time, I had not heard a plugin, or even like Axe Effects I wasn't a huge fan of at that time. Yeah. It just didn't sound the same, as good as I was getting it from a real amp. Yeah. So I was kind of one of those guys, years ago who was like, yeah, it's just not as good. But honestly, about probably in the past year when I started trying those Neural DSP plugins and some other like the STL stuff, it was just like, geez, this stuff sounds awesome. In some case, I prefer it to the real amp track I had. So it's right there, man. Yeah.
So what's your go-to approach for tracking bass?
I love tracking a nice SVT rig, if it's there. The 8x10 with the SVT heads, but most of the time we don't have that. So I'm happy with honestly a bass DI plugged into a SansAmp pedal. Yeah. Or if we don't have the SansAmp pedal, I mean, we usually do it because I have one and I keep it, but I would honestly just go DI with the SansAmp plugin in Pro Tools. Sounds fantastic. Basses, I'm pretty flexible. Like if we have some cool gear, I'll use it. If all we can do is a DI, that's cool too.
As long as the bass player has new strings on their bass, right?
Yes, always new strings, bass and guitar, intonate, set it up. Yeah, I found with bass, with every instrument, but bass especially, you can tell as soon as you plug in a DI, it's like, yeah, this is going to work, or nope, we need to go and rent a new bass.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I found that the two things that don't lie are snare drums, especially, and bass guitars. Like if they're not right, if the instrument itself is not right, there's nothing you can really do, to help it. So you're saying you were never one of those guys that would try out a bunch of different amps in the studio, trying out a bunch of different heads, different mic placement, combination of mics on your guitar and bass. You kind of like, did you have your go-to rig that you would use with most of your projects, or did you experiment a lot?
Early on, I definitely recorded and mic'd up a bunch of different amps because it was just whatever the band brought in, right? So I definitely got familiar with different Marshalls and Mesa amps and stuff like that. Yeah. And eventually I just realized, like, for kind of a modern metal sound, or even a classic metal sound, it's like the 5150 is that's just the sound. It's gonna work. So I got a 5150 for my studio, and then for anything that was not heavy and was not metal, I needed an amp that could kind of do like a cleaner, still like crunchy gain sound, but not like full 5150 type distortion. And so I ended up getting a JCM 800, and that was just from again, being around different bands and seeing kind of more established guitarists and bands and like what are they using, and I would always ask questions about the amps they would bring in, and it seemed like the 800 was kind of like the standard for everything from like pop rock and pop punk all the way up to some fairly heavy stuff. So I had those 2 amps in the studio, and that was it pretty much. That covered all my bases, but with a Mesa 2x12 cab, by the way, with V30s in it, and yeah, that covered all my bases, just those 2 amps. Occasionally, some bands would come in with other amps and other heads, and we would try those out. But if you listen to any of my work, there's probably a good chance that everything you're hearing is one of those 2 amps.
Yeah. So how about cabs? Were you crazy with switching different cabs, or everything was mainly that Mesa Boogie cab?
Everything was always that cab. Occasionally we'd try other ones, but it's just I'd be happy with anything with V30s in it, especially for, anything rock. So, if we have to use a different cab, that's totally fine, but I'm usually going after those speakers. Yeah. But yeah, I kind of would usually just stick with that cab that I had at my studio, the 2x12, and we'd run other heads through it if necessary. But I generally wouldn't even tell the band to bring their cabs.
Now, what'd you do for cleans?
Cleans? So that was the one area where I would use amp sims, even like 10 years ago. Yeah. I think I had like the amp farm. What was the free one? The amp farm?
Was it a Line 6 amp farm?
Or pod farm?
Pod farm, that's it.
Pod farm. Yeah. Pod farm. So it had like the AC30 like model in there and some other ones. And man, honestly, when a band came in to do something clean, I would just fire that up most of the time. If it was a band that was like clean, they only did clean tones, usually they had a good amp for that. Exactly. So they would bring in like, I don't even know because I haven't used them that much, but the Fender Twins, an AC30, like miking up those. I find that those are pretty easy to mic up. You just like they sound good almost wherever you put them.
I agree. Yeah. Clean tones I've always found to be just so much easier than heavy tones. I don't know what it is. I guess it's just the harmonics you have to deal with the heavy tones, that it's just so much more sensitive when you're placing the mic on the cab. Again, on the topic of tracking, what was your go-to approach for vocals, and did you have a specific mic that you would gravitate towards?
Yeah, it's this guy here, the SM7B. I tried many vocal mics in my studio, a bunch of large diaphragm condensers, even bought a Neumann U87. When I worked at that studio in Toronto, that's what, one of the mics they had. Every big studio has 87s. So most of the time when vocalists would come in, they would use the 87, and it sounded awesome in that studio. So I was like, well, I'm trying to do this for real, so I better get a legit vocal mic, And so I spent like $3,000 on that, and it never sounded good in my studio. Like, it sounded completely different than it did at the Toronto studio. And over time, I realized it was because of my room. It's like these more kind of high-end sensitive condenser mics, they're picking up all the low-level ambience. And so I found when I would go to mix, and I'm compressing, it's like all that's getting brought up, and it just sounds worse and worse. So it just never sounded the way I wanted to. Then I got an SM7, and it beat the 87 every single time on every singer. So, of course, I just sold that thing and tracked everything on this ever since. So
when a singer would come in, you wouldn't try multiple mics on them. You would just stick with the SM7B.
So I did. When I had the 87, I would almost always try both. Yeah. But this thing always sounded far and away much better. Yeah. So after 10 times of that, comparing like a $300 mic to a $3,000 mic, and the 300 one's always winning, eventually I sold the 87. And I never really would shoot out mics after that, because every time it just sounded great. I will say that a couple times I used actually a 421 on vocals.
Oh, I've never done that. For cleans or screaming?
For kind of like for screaming or just like more aggressive. We used it on one Silverstein record for screams, and we used it on just like a local punk band, like really kind of gritty singing. And it's almost kind of like the SM7 that you can be like right up on it, and be really aggressive with it. But if you take like the low filter on the back and put it like 2 clicks, it's just like, it sounds so bright. It almost needs no like top end in the mix, and it's just like, it's just got a really aggressive sound. You should definitely try it. It's pretty cool.
I'm gonna give it a shot. Yeah, because I've preferred SM7B simply because it's softer on the top end for screaming, and I've never had an issue with that mic. For me, it sounds great on every vocalist I've ever tried it with. But again, I hear people they audition like 100 different mics with different singers. But me personally, I've always been a whatever, if it works, stick with it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And knowing what you're going for, like if you're doing kind of a pop ballad,
Yeah.
for
Different story.
mainstream radio, like, yeah, maybe you want a nice, fancy, expensive condenser with a nice silky air on the top end. But if you're doing rock, I mean, it's going to work, guaranteed.
Yeah. Even at 58 will work.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, dude, are you a fan of pre-production? Do you feel it's important, or when you work with a band, you just kind of go in and just start tracking the record?
Yeah. So there's definitely got to be some degree of pre-production. For me, it kind of depends on the genre. So how I think of it is like the more accessible the music is, the more mainstream, melodic kind of hooky courses that repeat and stuff. I'm doing the most pre-production on those. Where like if I'm doing a pop punk band and I'm producing the record, I'm scheduling days or maybe even a week. Or like with Silverstein, we would do like 2 weeks of pre-production either in the studio, or I'd go to their practice spot and we just play the songs over and over and work on different parts. Sometimes we demo out entire songs in the studio for pre-production. But that's more about just like, I don't know, the more mainstream it is, it's like you want to make sure the melodies are nailed. You want to make sure that, none of the guitar parts are getting in the way of that vocal. Just making sure the song structure moves through all the parts as best as possible. If it's a more like technical metal band where there isn't really like courses and, the typical pop song structure, I'll definitely do less pre-production. Like I'd like to hear a demo in advance. I want to know what all the parts are so I can be conscious of it as I'm tracking. But generally I'm more comfortable like going a little more on the fly with those, because it's more about just like, I don't know, just kind of the heaviness and getting good sounds and good takes versus like nailing the song structure. You know what I mean?
100%. Now, do you ever get bands that, want to work with you that don't demo? Like, let's say you're working with a technical metal band and they don't demo. They're kind of old school and they just play in a room. They record their jam sessions with an iPhone. How do you go about that? Like, do you tempo map with bands, or do you kind of like require them to have all of that done before they even work with you?
Yeah, that was a requirement I put in quite a while ago, was that, I'm not going to book anyone unless either I hear a demo of the songs they want to record, or I can hear something that they've previously done.
Yeah.
Just so I can evaluate, can they play with a click? Do they have a reasonable understanding of, how to work in the studio, basically.
Yeah, no, I know it's crazy that even in 2020, there are still people, because I mean, Reaper is $60. You could get a budget interface for under $100, and there's still people that don't do pre-production. They don't even tempo map. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's funny when when I first got into this and I was interning, I remember one of the big fears we would all talk about, all of us interns, we would say like, oh my God, in 10 years, is every single person going to be tracking out of their house? And I think some people, they still need to work with a producer, even in 2020, even though the technology is there, they still need that ear and that, someone just to direct the film, so to speak.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. And even to that point, I had clients in my studio where they were recording their demos at home and they were doing a really freaking good job of it, where they would, honestly, the demos they would send me sometimes, I'd be like, this sounds like 90% like a finished record. Like they're coming to me to retrack it and we're getting that extra 10%, which to them it's worth it, right? And there will always be artists to where that is worth it. And I think also a lot of people get into the home recording stuff thinking that they can get those results, and then they realize that it's actually pretty hard and takes a lot of effort to learn how to get there. And so a lot of artists they'll maybe get into it and then realize like, yeah, you know what, like this is good for demoing my stuff and getting my ideas down, but I still want to work with someone who knows what they're doing.
Yep. I found the same thing to be true. Now, so you've done a lot of records, full production, pre-production, recording, tracking, mixing. These days, do you primarily mix? Is that accurate?
Yes, just mixing. It's been, honestly, aside from tracking for one of my courses, it's been a while since I've tracked full project. I was supposed to be tracking a record this summer. Hopefully it still happens. But yeah, I've been, actually before I started the online stuff, I kind of started phasing myself out of tracking and just focusing more on mixing projects. So it's been that way for a while, yeah.
So you're mixing out of your home studio then?
Yeah, I'm just in a room at home now. Yep.
Wow. Okay. And what's that like? What are you using? Like, what's your rig like?
Super simple. So I've literally got an Apogee Duet because I just need like the ins for doing this, and then just 2 outs, stereo mix. Everything's in the box. So that I have a PreSonus Central Station, NS10 monitors, Pro Tools. And that's pretty much it, man. Very simple.
Wow, pretty bare bones. So no outboard gear. You're not, reprinting tracks through, I don't know, like an outboard compressor, or is it all plugins?
Yeah, not anymore. I did keep my distressor for a number of years after I moved home, and I just never used it. But I just love that compressor so much. And there were so many times that I did like if I got sent a vocal track that wasn't compressed on the way in, I would run it through my distressor. But yeah, I brought it home and I never used it. And then recently I tried like the Slate emulation of the distressor, and I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds like what my distressor sounds like. So I was like, you know what? I guess it's time to let this thing go. I haven't used it in years. So yeah, no outboard now.
Wow. And it's a lot quicker than having to route stuff through and printing it back in, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So do you feel like you're missing anything by working working this way? Or do you feel pretty confident that you're putting out the same quality that you were even when you were using a little bit of outboard?
So I never really mixed with outboard that much, except for what I just said about maybe doing the vocals through that if I got sent something. But I would track, with the distressor a little bit on the snare, and I'd always track through it with vocals, stuff like that. But generally I always mix in the box. So I don't really feel like I'm missing anything except for maybe just feeling cool and looking cool when I do videos with my gear in the back. Like sometimes I'm like, maybe I should get some more gear just so it looks cooler. Yeah. But in terms of the sound, I've never been happier with what I'm getting here.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of this is psychological with people. It's like, when people come to my studio, it's extremely kind of like your setup. It's it's extremely bare bones, and they'll come in and be like, "Wait, that record was tracked here." I'm like, "Yeah, it's done on my laptop." I've been working like this for 15 years now. Right. But no, and the other thing is there's evidence out there. Like so many great sounding modern records are done in the box. Chad Blake, tons of guys. So in my opinion, if records exist that sound that amazing, the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, and then it's not about the gear, right? It's just about the person using it.
Yeah. Now, since plugins are so much cheaper than outboard gear, right? We can buy and audition an endless amount of plugins within our DAWs. Are you one of these guys that's always trying new plugins, or you kind of have your go-tos that you always go back to?
I got my go-tos, man. I've got a suite of Waves plugins that I pretty much use on everything. The SSL collection, it's like 90% of my mix is just the SSL channel, the SSL compressor, and I've got a few others that I like too. But yeah, I'm still going back to those, and man, I don't know, I probably got those plugins like 10 years ago. And they sound great. I know them so well now that it's almost like kind of in the old days, if you walked into a studio and you mixed on the same console every day, right? Like over years, like you know exactly how that thing's responding, and you don't care about anything else. You're just going to use what you have. And that's kind of where I'm at with plugins now. I try to get new plugins. I've bought a bunch recently, honestly, and I don't know. Maybe it's a patience thing, and maybe I'm just kind of like, I'm not that old, but in terms of like the audio, I feel like I'm just becoming kind of the old like dude who's just like, yeah, what I have works. I'm just gonna keep doing that kind of thing. But it takes, again, I like to work fast, so it takes a plugin has to really blow me away if it's going to get into my workflow, because inevitably when you get a new plugin, a new piece of software or gear, there's a learning curve. It takes time, and it kind of slows you down because you're kind of like learning how to get what you want out of this new tool. And so for something to like make me slow down my process to get used to it, it has to really be blowing me away. Otherwise, if I try a plugin and I don't, number one, understand how to use it right away. Like there's a bunch of Waves plugins I've got recently, and I open it up in the interface, like I don't understand what anything means.
So it's not just me then.
Yeah, it's not just you. Like,
dude, all these new plugins, I'm like, what the hell? Like, they don't even. I don't know. I guess they're supposed to be more efficient to like a beginner or something. I don't know, but I found the same thing to be true.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but even some of the old analog models, like again, I love Waves plugins, so I'm not knocking them at all. But I was collaborating with someone, and they were using the Omni channel, I think. Yeah. Which, I mean, it sounded good when they used it, but like I would open it up and I literally like, none of the knobs say like EQ or compressor or threshold, like they're all different weird names. And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? Yeah. So if I see a plug like that and I don't understand how to use it within like 30 seconds, then it's gone. Like I'll probably never touch it again, because I just hate being slowed down and confused. And the second thing is like, I just I just want to use the tools and they know what they're going to sound like when I do something so I can work fast. So if it's a plugin that's, let's say an EQ plugin that, has a bunch of these new cool features and looks really nice on the screen, like, again, if it's not sonically giving me something different than what I already have, I have no reason to replace that in my workflow. So I'm a little bit set in my ways. Maybe I could probably spend a little more time trying some new stuff, but at the same time, it's like, why change something that's working? I'm very happy with my mixes right now. I don't feel like anything's missing. So, yeah.
Well, it's like you were saying, back in the day when people were working with outboard and consoles, like they weren't switching out their console every 5 seconds. They got to know their console inside. Well, even Chris Lord-Alge, he admits that's why he works on that SSL, is because he doesn't even have to think. He plays it almost like it's an instrument.
Oh yeah, totally. And I think that's one of the reasons why people have trouble committing and mixing fast, because they have so many options.
Dude, yeah.
And it's just like every week they're trying out a new plugin. So it's like you can never get set in a workflow and get efficiency and get your brain trained to know what tool to use when and how it's going to react. Like if you're never sticking with something, you're never going to get there.
Yeah, I definitely think less is more with plugins. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
So where do you, when you open up a mix, where do you generally start? Do you have like a kind of like an approach that you utilize with every mix that you tackle? Do you start with drums? Like how do you start off just a mix in general?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll do is I always want to take the kind of technical, non-creative stuff out of the way first. So when I open up a mix, it's simple things like I'm putting all the tracks in the same order. So from left to right, I just like it to have my drums, my bass, guitar, my vocals. And so I'm reorganizing it like that, kind of doing a little bit of color coding, setting up my buses, stuff like that. So once I get it organized properly, then I'm just doing a rough mix. So just trying to get the faders, not really doing any EQ unless there's something, let's say there's like a crazy rumble on some track that's killing everything else. Like I'll maybe adjust that, but generally just doing a rough balance with just the faders, trying to get things sounding good. Then I'll go into what I call like the heavy lifting, which is where the bulk of the mix is, right? That's where I'm really diving in like track by track, EQ, compression. So yeah, I'll start with drums, and I'll get the drums feeling pretty good. Then I'll add the bass in, and usually the bass and rhythm guitars I'll kind of add in at the same time, and then add the vocals in. Of course, like every step along the way, I'm kind of jumping back and forth, right? Like I'm focusing on the drums first, but once I move on to bass, guitar, and vocals, as I'm adjusting the bass and guitars, that might make me go back and fiddle with the snare more, and then I'm back to the guitars. So really, I do work on the drums by themselves first, but then once we get into adding everything else in, it's kind of a free-for-all where I'm kind of just like I do go in that order of drums, bass, guitar, vocals, but kind of throughout the whole process, everything's kind of feeding into each other, and I'm kind of going back and forth and get like kind of a static mix with like no reverb, no effects, no automation. Then I'll start adding effects, reverb, and kind of delay to vocals and stuff. And then once I get those sounding good, then I'm doing a bunch of automation. I love automation. I do tons of it in the mix. And then from there, once I get through everything with automation, then I'm just sitting back and listening to a few passes, making any final tweaks. And that's it. And that's basically the process that I follow every time.
Are you a top-down guy?
No, I am not. I'm kind of the opposite of top-down, actually. What about you? I
am not a top-down guy, except let's say there's strings in the track, like live strings. I'll bust them to a submix and then just EQ, compress, and add saturation to the submix, just because there's so many tracks that it doesn't make sense to EQ them individually. But outside of that, the main instruments, drums, guitars, bass, vocals, all, I'm definitely not a top-down mixer type of guy. I guess for certain genres that works. It doesn't work for the stuff that I do, the heavy stuff.
It's cool to hear that, because I think I've just heard more and more people talking about, start top-down. It's like, I'm like, I guess you would call it bottom up, you and I, right?
Yeah.
I just think.
And a lot of people ask about it. It's really popular now.
It doesn't totally make sense for me. I also think there's a spectrum of what people are talking about. Yeah. Like I'll hear like a big name mixer talk about like, oh yeah, like I mix top down, but then you actually go into what they're doing and they're like literally talking about like they add like a high and low shelf, like a dB or two on their mix bus first. That's what they do first.
Exactly.
And then everything else is like not top down. So versus, a lot of people are, when they say top down online on YouTube, they're talking about like everything on buses, right? So yeah, I just, it doesn't make that much sense to me, because I don't know if like, let's say on drums, why would I be, if I want more brightness or I want my more 8K on the snare, then why am I adding that to the whole bus. Like maybe I don't want that on cymbals. Maybe I don't want that on the hi-hat. Like
I know, man. I found the same to be true. I like that. What is it? So top down, bottom up mixers. We'll start that.
Bottom up.
There you go.
Yeah, let's publish some videos. Bottom up mixing.
Now, are you a template guy with your mixes? Like, do you have an actual mix template that you get raw tracks and just drop it into a template and tweak, or do you avoid templates altogether, or somewhere in the middle?
I love templates now. Honestly, I've only introduced those maybe in the past few years, but it's saved me so much time because I just realized, man, I'm always inserting the same plugins. I'm always using the same buses and routing. I got to put this in a template. So once I did that, things sped up a lot. And it also allowed me to really easily outsource mix prep when necessary. So if I'm really busy and I've got a full length album, like just renaming and organizing all those tracks and setting up each session, like that's a lot of hours. So with a template, I can send it to someone else and just be like, hey, make it match this, you know? So these days, I really treat my template almost as if that's like going back to that console analogy where my template has all my routing set up, you know, my drums sending to my drum bus and my parallel compression bus. And I've got all my effects sends and returns in there. And I've also got my typical go-to plugin chains inserted already. And even within that, on a bunch of tracks, I've got like the EQs set to kind of go-to points. So like for kick and snare, I'm typically boosting like 8K for the high end there. So I'll have that knob already set to 8K. So I literally just I import my template, and if I want to adjust the kick, I open up that SSL channel. All the frequencies are set with kind of my go-to starting points, and I can just kind of start adding stuff. And of course, I might change stuff depending on the material, but at least everything's there as a starting point, just as if I sat down on a console and everything's patched in. And I'm just like, oh, I want my compressor on the vocals, and you reach back to the outboard and it's already patched in. You just hit a button and it's there. Kind of the same thing, same kind of idea with my mixing template.
Dude, love it, man. Anything that keeps the workflow efficient so you can get right to work being creative in the flow state, I'm all about.
Yeah, me too.
So, okay, dude, I get this question all the time and I can't wait to hear your opinion on this. What is your take on gain staging? That's become the new buzzword, gain staging. I never even really thought about it much, to be honest. As long as things aren't clipping internally, like into plugins on the way in, I don't know. But I'm curious to know what your take on it is.
Yeah. The reason that you've never thought about it is because you actually are making real records and you're not just making videos for YouTube. Yeah, I'm right with you, man. It's not something I ever thought about. It's just make sure you're not clipping on the way in. And when it comes to mixing, it's there's all this technical details, and I've read up about it, about how when the red light and the plugin comes on, there's still actually tons of headroom. You're not actually hard clipping, right? So even in the mix, if the odd time a red light's popping on a plugin or something, if it sounds fine, I'll sometimes just leave it. But generally I'm I don't know, if the meter's not hitting red, then it's fine. It honestly doesn't matter. And I just I set it by eye now. Maybe you're the same. Just after working so many years, in Pro Tools, I know what the waveform should, how tall it should be on the screen in order to end up with a final mix where it's, I have 6 dB of headroom or something on the master fader. It's completely visual. I'm definitely not one of those guys who's doing the YouTube thing where it's everything is set to -18, all this crap. It's as if that's the thing that's going to make your mixes sound better. It's kind of ridiculous.
It's crazy. Yeah, people think that there's some sweet spot that if you're above -18, it's going to sound harsh and brittle. But I don't know. Maybe I'm going deaf. I have no idea, but I've just never been able to hear it. So
no, me neither. I don't know. They say, oh, these analog model plugins, they're coded to work with a certain level of input signal that's equivalent to the analog. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know. I mean, why would a plugin designer do that? I'm going to design my plugin to work with signals that are not what anyone is recording.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then also, I don't know. I've just never bothered with that. Yeah. It's if I load up a plugin and the input is clipping on the plugin, I'll just turn down the input.
Yeah. That's common sense.
You don't. Yeah.
Or clip gain it down or something.
Clip gain it down now. Yeah. So common sense, totally common sense. Yeah.
So dude, how do you know, I know, cause we can get wrapped up in mixing a song forever, right? Cause it's, as we know, a mix is never really finished. You can tweak it till the end of the time. When do you say enough is enough? It's good. I'm going to send it to the artist. When do you know you've got it?
Yeah. I would say back to the workflow thing. That's a huge part of it. If you're not approaching every mix the same. Like if you're doing it a different order every time and you're trying different plugins every time, it is kind of hard to know when the mix is done. So that's a big part of it, is because again, when I go through, there's 7 steps in that workflow. So when I get to the 7th step, which is listening back a couple times with the screen off and making notes of any small changes, I'll make a small change, I'll listen again. And once I listen through and I don't have any notes of changes, then it's done. And I know I'm at the last step of my process, so I've already taken care of everything, right? A big thing too is that I commit to stuff and print down everything as much as possible. So drum samples, once I find a sample that I like in the mix, I'm printing that down to audio. That trigger track is gone. Even if I'm using amp sims, I'm printing that down to audio. So I eliminate that temptation to like go back and swap out drum samples or swap out amp tones, because that will just screw you. But yeah, I think in terms of really knowing when you've got it, I get to that final step of the mix and it's just, okay, there's nothing else that I can obviously hear that needs to be done. So I'm going to print this out and take it to the car and check it. And I think setting deadlines too is a big thing. Like even if you're just working for yourself, like if you're just doing your own music and you don't necessarily have a client who's waiting on you, I think you've got to set a deadline and actually stick to it, because that's another thing. Like we talked about at the start of this interview about, doing records and as you're sending it out, feeling unsatisfied with it. That happened to me, but that's so beneficial, because if you're always working on the same thing and never finishing it, you're missing out on so much opportunity to get your hands on new material and learn and grow. Like you're never going to grow if you're just doing the same thing. So I think even if you think it's not good enough, like set a deadline, get it out, move on to the next thing. Yep. That's the fastest way to get better.
I agree. I think that's one of the other big secrets, is to do a high volume of work. Even if it's your own music, like you were saying, just keep doing projects. If you get hung up on one project, I'll talk to people and they'll be like, oh, I've been mixing this album for a year. I'm like, a year? But then again, I'd be a hypocrite because I've been there, But sure. Setting a deadline and just getting it done and moving on to the next thing. Couldn't agree more. I can't wait to hear your opinion on this next. I know I always say that, but I really can't wait to hear this.
Okay.
So much information online, or so many, the big opinion is that records are sounding like robots. We shouldn't be editing. It's cheating. Are you one of these guys when you were recording, did you go for like a natural raw feel, like a live band? Or are you a fan of editing?
Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of editing. So I'm just a realistic guy. Like I want to live in the real world and operate as an engineer in the real world. And that means that you're probably gonna have to tune your vocals. You're gonna have to quantize your drums, if you want it to sound up to that pro level standard. If you don't care if anyone ever listens to your work, then fine. Have those natural, limits where you're never gonna edit or you're never gonna use a sample. Whatever. If you're just doing this purely for hobby, totally fine. If you want to actually have clients, you build a name for yourself, get people to listen to your records, then there is a certain bar of quality that you've got to hit. Now, to me, it's not all the tools are fair game, like drum editing, vocal tuning, all that stuff. It's just what's going to get it up to this bar. And sometimes you come in and the musicians are down here and you're using a lot of this stuff to get it up to that bar. And sometimes the musicians are right here and it's just a little bit. So I think there's a bit of an art. I think you have to learn all the editing tools, all the editing skills. You have to be able to do it so that when the band is really struggling, you can still get it up to that bar. And that's how you build the credibility and have everything on your discography sounding top notch. You've got to have those skills to cover that gap and solve those problems. But it's also the art of and to be honest, I went through a period in my career where I over edited and I used these tools when I didn't need to. And I just did too much. And I think everyone kind of goes through that when they're learning this stuff, but you kind of got to get to that point where as an artist, as a producer and engineer, you can really, when it's okay, the drummer's, his dynamic feel is really awesome here. I got to be careful that I don't ruin this with samples. Or, the guitar player, let's say, XYZ local bands, who can't really play their parts. Man, I'm using a lot of tracking tricks, tracking in small sections, stuff like that to get those guitars up to par. But then let's say in intervals comes in and Aaron Marshall, he's right here. So I'm trying not to mess with that, where it's we're not hardly splitting much stuff up at all unless we need to. So, it's walking that line between using the tools when you need to, but then also being able to keep your hands off it and not just do it as a matter of course, just because, you're afraid of it, not sounding right or something. There's definitely I think the misconception is you think if you're drum editing, if you're splitting up guitar parts, if you're using auto-tune, then you're automatically just you don't actually know what you're doing and you're just, cheating or something. I don't think it's that at all. I mean, people have been doing this on records since it's kind of a myth that this is new. It's not new at all. I was talking to Warren Hewitt the other day and he's like, oh yeah, guys used to, we cut tape. You'd literally have a click track on the tape and you'd be lining up by hand, to get the kick and the snare on the click track and cutting and taping the tape together. And, so it's been done for ages. It's just faster and easier now.
So I know this goes without saying. So you do use drum samples.
I do use drum samples. Yeah. At varying degrees. Sometimes kick and snare completely replaced. Again, it depends. Other times, it's just enhancing and augmenting.
So yeah, I think people have black and white thinking with this. They think that, you're either using all drum samples, 100%, making drummers sound like drum machines, or it's 100% natural. There's a spectrum, plus it's just another tool like EQ, compression. You could use drum samples 50%, even less, 20% if that's what the record calls for and the genre calls for. So, yeah. And the other thing people don't really, I don't know if you've had this experience. Have you ever worked with a band and they're like, we don't want drum samples? We don't want, and you're like, okay. And then you were like, well, what do you want your record to sound like? And then they'll show you a Trivium record. Have you ever had that happen?
Yes,
okay.
Definitely.
How did you handle it? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'll just, I took an approach, people ask me this because we talk about editing and, even tracking strategies of putting performance together in tiny pieces to make it sound really tight if the player can't play. And people always ask, well, how do you do that with the band? Do you just do this all when they go home? It's I just eventually, that takes way too long. Yeah, if you're fooling them and wasting days and then changing it all later, you can't do that. So I took an approach where I'd just be really straight up with bands. Just be okay, so what? I would try to get underneath that specific question. Be well, why don't you want to use drum samples? Because these records you're giving me clearly, let me tell you, they are using drum samples. What is this thing? And usually it's, you usually discover that there's just some perception that they're afraid of being judged a certain way, or, maybe out of the 10 bands they like, their favorite band, the one favorite band, they did a record without drum samples and it's their favorite and whatever. It's just probably some weird reason or insecurity that they're saying that, or they're just trying to look cool on the surface or something. But a lot of times too, it just takes hearing the difference. It's okay, well, here's what your drums are going to sound like without samples. Do you like that? It's well, I don't know. Can we hear it with samples? And then, add some samples in. It's oh yeah, that's the sound we want.
Yeah.
It's
okay. Plus I think it's a lot of misinformation. People will, or some of the bands that say we didn't use samples on this record. They didn't even know that the mixer used samples, so their fans think that there's no samples. When I was in college, there were a few records like that where some of the kids in the audio program, they're oh, this new record, there's no drum samples. And I hear it, I'm dude, those are definitely drum samples, Yeah. If the band is saying they're not, they probably just didn't even know, So.
They just don't know. Yeah. I think too, it's like you said about the perception of, maybe some artists are worried and they're thinking that if you use drum samples, like you said, it means that you're going to completely wipe out all of their feel and dynamics and any originality. And it doesn't have to be like that. You can use samples in a way that, the mix still falls apart without their real drum tracks. In fact, that's what that's what I'm going for most of the time. I'm trying to get a balance of the sample to where this kick and the kick sample together, if I mute either one of them, it doesn't work. Right. So that's kind of generally what I'm going for. And that way you still have a unique drum sound on every record, but then you're still hitting that competitive kind of punchy quality.
The best of both worlds.
Exactly.
So why do you feel that so many people think that gear, high-end gear is necessary when clearly there are dozens and dozens and dozens of albums being released every year that are done with budget gear? Why do you think there's still this obsession? For example, the Gear Sluts Forum. In 2020, why do you think this is still a thing, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think maybe a couple things. Maybe one, because we're all still kind of idolizing the older mixer, the Chris Lord Alges and all the plugin companies are still modeling their gear. So I think there is a sense of like, well, the guys who are still the biggest names, like they're still using this stuff. And like you said, a lot of them are going in the box now, but that still exists a little bit. So maybe that's something. I think maybe deeper, it's kind of human nature, and I'm not even exempt from this. Sometimes I can see like a really cool piece of outboard gear, and I'm like, man, that would look really cool here, and maybe it would sound really cool, and there's something exciting about having new stuff too. But I think it's just human nature to kind of externalize the problem and think, well, it's because I don't have this gear. It's like when you want to get in shape, and it's like instead of just like going out your front door and running, it's like, you're trying to find the best gym, or you're buying like a fancy treadmill, or you're getting all the workout gear, the shoes and the shorts, thinking that that's going to motivate you to get in shape, when really you just need to like put in the time and work,
It's true, man. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, there's definitely like a strong correlation between the fitness industry and the audio industry, I found, like the diet myths and the audio myths, there's just so much crossover,
Yeah. I'm often using those kind of metaphors I've found.
So can you share one of your favorite production techniques that you felt really pushed the needle forward for your own work? Like if there's, maybe like one or two things that once you started implementing, really took your work to the next level.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things was tracking guitars. The tuning and the performance and the overall tightness of your guitar tracks is huge. I was talking with one of my favorite producers at the time, was this guy named Andreas Magnuson. He's worked with O Sleeper. He was in the band Scarlet, something like Haste the Day, some really cool records. And I had found him on the Gears List forum by chance. And he was kind enough to answer a bunch of my questions over a private message over a period of a couple of years. And I remember I asked him something about guitars, and he messaged me back. He said, oh yeah, like, we'll typically get maybe 1.5, and if we're lucky, we'll get 2 songs done on guitar a day when they're tracking guitar. And that, I was like, wait a second, that's different, because I'll track a whole album of guitars in a day, right? Just like set up the amp, hit record, and the guy just plays it. So I'm like, okay, there's obviously an attention to detail here that is beyond what I am aware of right now. So I started listening to his records, listening to a bunch of other records that I loved, and really focusing on those guitars. I was like, wait a second. Like every single part is like in tune, and there's no mistakes. Like it's perfectly played, it's tight, and even like super technical stuff. And so it was this light bulb. I was like, that's what I should do. And it took a lot of trial and error to figure out how to do that. But I started just not compromising on guitar takes. So, if a guy's playing a riff and it's sloppy and he can't play it, it's like, okay, we're splitting that up till we're cutting that section down until as little as it has to be so he can play it cleanly. So hopefully that's a lot of notes, but if it's just 3 notes, then it's 3 notes, And if he's playing a course and the first 2 chords sound fine, but the third one is up here in the neck and it's out of tune because the intonation is just a bit off, then it's like, okay, we're stopping, we're tuning to that chord, we're punching in that chord, and then we're tuning again for the next chord, and just no compromise at all. Like we are not moving on until this is in tune and it's tight. And I want it to sound real too. But yeah, I would say that was one of the things. I was definitely learning a lot about mixing and tracking other instruments as well. But I think maybe a year or 2 prior to learning that, I had already started kind of getting my drum tracks a little better. I was getting good at drum editing. I could quantize the drums, vocal tuning, I was good, but the guitars were still like hit or miss because it was just depending on the player. And then I found as soon as I figured that out, it was like, not only did everything sound tighter, but the guitar tones sounded great.
I noticed that, man. It's crazy. You can have the same exact guitar tone, and it's not, you're not feeling it. It doesn't sound amazing, but when the performances are tight and they're locked in with the drums, just the overall production comes to life. And all of a sudden the perceived guitar tone sounds so much better. I always tell people that, like when you hear guitar in isolation, that's not, it's all about the big picture, and the tightness, in my opinion, is I don't know, like 70% of it at least.
Yeah, the tightness is everything. And I think, again, it was Andreas Magnuson who told me that. He said, a big, powerful mix does not come from a bunch of layers stacked on top of each other. In fact, that can often make a mix sound smaller.
Couldn't agree more.
A big mix sounds big because everything is in tune and it's hitting at the same time. Yep. And I found that to be so true. So just one left and right rhythm guitar played really tightly and in tune is always going to sound better than no matter how many stacks of layers you put in, how many amps you blend, guaranteed.
And what I like about this is this has nothing to do with gear, preamps, anything. This is all just a workflow thing and a technique. So now when it comes to viewers that are in their home studios, if you had to give them one piece of advice to take home that really makes a huge difference, just in production in general, whether it's tracking, mixing, anything, what would you say? What would be your biggest piece of advice?
Okay, can I split it up to tracking and mixing?
Sure, yeah, one of each.
Okay. So for tracking, I would say along the lines of what we're saying, like get the sound at the source, get it sounding like 75, 80% of what you want to hear in the final mix as you're tracking. So whether that's guitar tones, your vocal takes, whatever, like don't stop until that sounds pretty much what you want it to sound like in the final mix. Because then that way, when you get to the mix time, you're just enhancing and you're bringing out like the best of it versus trying to fix and redo everything. So get the sounds and performances right at the source as you're tracking, and commit to sounds. Don't always, keep going back and forth. Print it down to audio, move on, just kind of like the old days. And for mixing, I would say my number one tip would be to focus on enhancing rather than fixing. I think that a lot of us are kind of we're always in the almost defensive mindset of like when we're mixing, it's like we got to find all the problems and notch out all the frequencies and, clean everything up. Whereas these days it's like, man, I don't know about you, but I'm mixing faster and faster these days because like I just spend less and less time like fixing stuff. Like I avoid solo, so I don't even hear a lot of the tiny little problems that people go crazy over. And if you look at any of my mixes recently, it's like there's not a bunch of notching out. There's not a bunch of dips, really. It's just enhancing. It's like, here's the sound. Okay, just pump it up, make it bigger, make it sound exciting, make it fit. And I think just having that mindset of like, I'm trying to think of like a cool way to say it, but in my mind now, it's like offensive versus defensive mixing.
No, I totally get it.
I think you got to be more on the offensive side.
Yeah, I always hear people like doing these, I'll look at these EQ settings on their guitars and they have all these frequencies notched out. And I think about it, like there were great guitar tones recorded in the 80s when you didn't have 25 band graphic, EQ plugins. And how did they do it back then? They weren't notching out 5,000 frequencies, on their guitars, and they sounded great. So I love what you're saying, man. It totally, I found the same to be true. It's just, it's all about just taking what's there. If it's good, great, just enhance it, but don't always be looking for problems that don't exist, so to speak. Yep. Even in a home studio, even if you're mixing into box, even if you're recording with programmed drums and amp sims, same philosophy.
Totally. And I would even offer some encouragement to people who are just working at home, maybe within an unideal environment. When I actually went out of that project studio, Sundown Studio, and came home to mix, I was like scared to death because I was like, okay, I'm coming out of this space where I had like way more treatment and I had like a cloud above me on the ceiling. And, it was just more of a studio environment. And I was like, am I going to be able to mix here at home? Like in a bedroom at home? Like what if the acoustics are all wacky? And I was super nervous the first project I did. But it was the best mix I ever did. And the artist even said it. And I had mixed one of his previous records in my studio and mixed his new one at home. And he was like, this is the best mix I've ever had. And so that I kind of had a sigh of relief and gained a bit of confidence. But I actually think I get better mixes here at home because it's imperfect. So it's because there are like noise from my kids outside the room sometimes, because sometimes there's loud trucks out on the road. And it kind of takes away, again, all those low level, like really minute details that don't matter. Those are just off my radar now. And so I literally am just enhancing and focusing on what matters because I literally can't hear anything else because it's not a sterile environment where you hear every little detail, right? Like you just hear the big picture. And I think that actually really helps me.
That's awesome.
So I would say you absolutely can get pro quality stuff no matter where you are. Just comes down to knowing your speakers, putting the hours in, practicing. And don't think that you need to have this perfect set of gear or perfect room treatment or anything like that. Like you can absolutely hit this bar without that.
Dude, couldn't agree more. And I would say that that pretty much covers everything. So I just want to say thank you for being on the channel.
Thank you, man. This was a really fun interview. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome. I've been a fan for a long time, and some of these questions I've always wanted to ask, and now I know the answers, which is great. Perfect. So people could find you youtube.com/hardcore music studio and your website, hardcoremusicstudio.com.
That's it. Yep.
Awesome. I will leave links below in this video's description. And thanks again, man.
Yeah. Thank you, man. It was a pleasure.